rushing to have a bunch of people following you, a bunch of people buying your product, a bunch of people that you're trying to influence. There's no point in rushing that, because what you're gonna learn is the power of impact. You'll be able to get more insight as you move forward. My name is Damon Brown of DamonBrown.net. My main thing is helping you as a side hustler, a solopreneur, or otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. Today we're gonna talk about 2 Chainz, who you may never have heard of, but he's a very popular rapper. He's had multi-platinum albums, he's had a wonderful career. He also started off very, very small, as in a local talent down in Atlanta. He actually changed his name once or twice. He's had a long journey. He's about my age, so he's approaching midlife, and he's been in the business as a rapper and as a creator and as a business person for about 2.5 decades. So we have a lot of parallels here. The insight from 2 Chainz is priceless. In fact, as I said in my original column that I did for Inc. magazine, you can check it out at damonbrown.com. This is something that Seth Godin would say. So if you think of Seth Godin and you think of 2 Chainz, you might not combine them together. I saw it though, I saw an interview with him. I think this is so brilliant. And what it's about is about creating something that will last with your business career and about serving people. If you want more insight like this, be sure to subscribe and also check out the playlist. There's 3 or 4 playlists that are pretty popular and you'll get more insight in regards to that. So this is what 2 Chainz said in a fabulous interview. For my longest, my goal was to get a fan a day. And sometimes it was that I was one song away because I was recording every single day. As an entertainer, you're always one thing away. I always knew that I was. You were always one thing away. He was focused on 1 fan a day. This is back when he was presumably broke. This is when he was selling CDs literally out of the trunk. I'm guessing down in Atlanta, which is where he's from. This is when he was recording every single day. Think about it. He might not have had a record contract. He might have been not sure how he was gonna pay his bills, but he's recording every single day. That commitment. There's lots of videos I've done on this channel about that. Again, you can subscribe to check those out. So we won't get into that part. What I wanna focus on is the 1 fan a day. Number 1, it's all about the minimal viable audience. As I talked about in a recent video about getting press and why you don't really need it for whatever service you're trying to do, the minimal viable audience idea comes from Seth Godin. He is the founder of Akimbo and recently stepped away to do his own business and to let it go independent. You can learn more about him at akimbo.com. He's a brilliant marketer and he's an excellent teacher. And he talks about creating the minimal viable audience. Now, the minimal viable audience means you creating something and engaging with the smallest people possible. Not short, but the smallest audience. If you're creating an app, which I've done a couple in the past, I ended up selling the last one that I did. If you're writing a book, if you're creating music, if you're, now that we're starting to get out of sheltering in place, if you're having concerts and you're engaging with the audience, with your singing or your guitars or whatever, your slam poetry, don't worry about crowding everyone in and getting, Wembley Stadium in there. Focus more on the individuals. If you do that, there's a few big benefits that come from it. Number 1, you're able to figure out what kind of impact your art, your creation is having on the audience. Once you get to a certain scale, you don't know. I remember my first major book came out. It was about the history of sexuality in video games called Porn and Pong. You can look it up. Came out about 13, 14 years ago. Other books of mine that came out, but that was my first. That was like my baby. I remember going down to New Orleans, which is where I used to live, but it was after I moved from there. Went down with my girlfriend, now wife. We ended up having a book signing in my old neighborhood, or right outside of my old neighborhood in the Farborough Marigny. If you're down there, you know where that is. And 3 people came. Literally 3 people. So we had other business in New Orleans, but I flew all the way down. I think I was in California at the time. Flew all the way from California to New Orleans to have a book signing for my first major book. 3 people came. One of them might have been my wife. I can't remember, but it was definitely 3 people, right? And I gave my all. And it was great. Fast forward years later, I'm doing keynotes and I had one last year, I had 1,000 people in the crowd, but I knew how to talk to them. I talked to them as individuals. I talked to them not as this lump sum of 1,000 people. I knew what kind of impact my work made on them. In fact, that's part of what made me a keynoter a few times last year, is I knew how to talk to them individually. That's what 2 Chainz is talking about. That's what Seth Godin is talking about. That's what I'm talking about. You're creating for one. There's not gonna be 10 million people reading this book at the same time. I look forward to that. But at the end of the day, it's gonna be you and me. You reading this book and me inside of it. Literally. That's it. So at the end of the day, when I've had my bestsellers, and I've had a few, or I've had my modest hits, or I've had ones that were goose eggs, and I've had some books that flopped, it still ends up being the same process. That's what 2 Chainz is talking about. At the end of the day, it's always gonna be a fan a day. Your influence is always gonna be one-on-one, no matter what you create. I'm cool with, friends with, have talked to at a distance from some of the best-selling authors within the space that I talk about, with thought leadership, entrepreneurship, and business. I don't even have to name them. We all are doing the same thing. I know them. We have coffee together. We have a drink together. We have lunch together. I've seen them speak and then, giving them props after their keynotes. We're all doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing I was doing in New Orleans more than a dozen years ago when I was talking to 3 people. They're talking to 3,000. Some of them are talking to 30,000. We're all having the same experience. And so you rushing to have a bunch of people following you, a bunch of people buying your product, a bunch of people that you're trying to influence, there's no point in rushing that, because what you're gonna learn is the power of impact. You'll be able to get more insight as you move forward. One of the challenges too, if you're going for the big audiences, which 2 Chainz knew really early, is that if your stuff is for everybody, that means it's for nobody. We find this a lot in the coaching space. We find this a lot in the creative space, particularly with writing, where if you're writing a book and someone says, who's your book for? This book? This is for people who are trying to make impact, who have limited resources, over-mentored and underappreciated, who aren't sure, they know what kind of impact they want to make, but they're not sure if they can actually make the impact. So they need to create a framework to build with that, to build from now. And they're not exactly sure how to do it. This is going to give them the framework for it. They have a passion about something. I'm going to help them build from now based on the resources they have, no matter where they are in the world. That sure as hell isn't everybody. But there's so many times when we'll create something and you might ask, well, who's it for? Well, it's for everybody. No, hell no. Pardon my French, not going to happen. Because when you make something for everybody, it becomes mush. It becomes the lowest common denominator, as we used to say about TV back in the day, right? You're creating something for everybody, it's mush. But that's what happens when you're thinking about hundreds of thousands of people and you're not thinking about one individual. You're not thinking about me as an individual when you create something. That's what 2 Chainz, that's what he understood. That's why he has a success and continues to have success. Again, we're on parallel tracks. And so I know that journey. Our journeys aren't that much different. He's been in the business for a while. This is why he's still in the business. He's still thinking of one fan at a time. The second thing, which I touched on, is that you learn how to scale. If you're working with one fan a day, ironically enough, you learn how to scale. Again, back to my startup Cuddler. We had a handful of beta users, which means early users, before something launches or when things are just starting to launch. They call it a soft launch nowadays. We had beta users all summer of that 2014 before we launched the app in fall of 2014. We're talking with them. Again, I was a COO and I was a CMO. So I looked at myself as like the head of community. So I'm talking to them every day. We're figuring out the bug reports. I'm sending the bug reports to my 2 other founders. One was an artist, one was a programmer, and the programmer was the CEO. And so getting as much feedback as possible. We ended up launching September 18th of 2014. Within a week, we had 100,000 users and 10,000 completed connections. In other words, 10,000 people had experience on our app. We had only been out for about 7 days. 100,000 people had downloaded it and used it. Those are incredible numbers, even to this day. If we hadn't done that work with that 2 dozen or so beta testers that we had literally all around the world, because we were an international group. I was in the US, my partner was in the UK, and then our other partner was in Canada. If we didn't have all these beta testers internationally working on our stuff, then we wouldn't have been ready to scale. Imagine all the bug issues. Imagine all the community issues, all the stuff that would have popped up. Like, it gives me a headache years later, even thinking about if we just did it. But instead we focus again on one fan at a time, one fan a day. Because we did that, when 10,000 fans came in, when 100,000 fans came in, when 250,000 fans came in, we were ready. We were fine. It was hard, but we were absolutely ready because we were able to scale. Sometimes we have these big picture ideas. We want to have the bestseller. We want to have the #1 app in the world. We want to have all the riches. And we're afraid to scale back because we think we're going to lose the vision. It's actually quite the opposite. If you focus on the now, you focus on the next best step, as Oprah would say, focusing on the next best step. That gives you the foundation, the insight, the grit to be ready for the next stage. If I didn't have my flop books early in my career, and I have a handful that did goose eggs, if I didn't have book signings where literally no one came, I was sitting there talking with the bookseller for an hour, about my career and learning about their career because no one showed up to my book signings. So then when 5 people came to the book signings, I had appreciation. When 1,000 people came to a book signing or came to see me speak, my appreciation is through the roof. But I remember a dozen plus years ago, nobody was coming to see my stuff. And back to 2 Chainz, I saw and appreciated that fan a day. If you don't appreciate that fan a day, that one fan that you got that will buy anything that you got, is ready to be served by you, if you don't appreciate that one person, you're not ready for the 10,000. You're not ready for the bestseller. You're not ready for the platinum hit. You're not ready. So you need to appreciate the fans first. Then, if it's meant to be, things will build on there. When you're doing something innovative, it's going to be different. If you're going to be changing the culture and you don't want to do the status quo, then why would everyone understand what you're trying to do unless it was a status quo, right? There's a built-in contradiction. As creators, as solopreneurs, such as myself and maybe like yourself, we're going to be doing things that are different, that are ideally radical, I would say. Whether it's doing a book, doing a TV show, doing an app or a startup, a new business, even doing keynotes, which I do keynotes as well. It's so important to know and respect where your ideas are coming from and that other people might not get them right away. But more importantly, there's 2 strategic ways why actually people not taking you seriously can be a great thing. Number 1, as I was saying, most things that end up changing a culture are considered absurd. It doesn't make any sense. If you think about the way that we function as an environment right now, again, let's go to the example of Airbnb. When they started, it was around the time I was living in Silicon Valley. So it's from 2008 to 2011, around that time they had started. When they started, they couldn't get any attention from any venture capitalist. It's just 2, I think they might have been post-grad, maybe even college kids, who there was an event happening. I want to say it was a yacht event. I want to say America's Yacht, something to that effect. Feel free to look it up online. Because there's a lot of big wigs that come into town in San Francisco, let me be specific, very high rent. It's kind of like the West Coast version of Manhattan. Again, I lived there for a while. Very expensive city. So what the 2 young guys decided to do is to say, look, a bunch of people are going to be coming to San Francisco for this boating event, right? I think it's a boating race, actually, so it must not be a yacht. For this boating race, why don't we go ahead and rent out the spare room in our apartment and then go from there? That's literally how it started. And it was something on Craigslist that they ended up doing, and it's a fascinating story behind it. Lots of adventures, including selling things on the side, and they were like serious hustlers. So shout out to Brian as well as Joe, who are the 2 founders of it. But when they started this thing, they were getting laughed out of venture capitalist offices. Think about it. Like, let's just sit with this for a second. My partner and I, my wife, we have or can make a spare bedroom if we end up moving the kids around and all that stuff, right? We're going to have a stranger come into this house who we just met through a website, pay us up front, and then just live in our house. That sounds absurd. It sounds absurd. The only two cases before that where you would see that happening is if someone was adopted, if you had some type of in-home cleaning service like a maid or a butler, right? Or you had some relative that came from out of town and you barely knew them. When that idea was first struck, people thought they were crazy and they went uphill. And then suddenly the culture changed. You might have these ideas that are brilliant, that are great, that are different, right? The key thing is different. The wave, the flow of the culture might be going in one direction. Yours might be going a little bit against it or 100% against it. You are going to encounter friction. If you have an idea that no one else has thought of, or more importantly, that no one else has executed, then why don't you think that the other people who tried to do it weren't able to make it? Or if you have a new idea that really is truly radical, where it's your idea and no one else has literally thought about it before, which is pretty rare, then it's going to go against the cultural norms. So you are going to get that pushback. Now, it's important to differentiate between constructive criticism and feedback and being shut down and being straight up critical. And that's why it's important to have people in your circle who, what I call your brain trust, people who you know, people who you trust, people who know what direction you're trying to go at with your career, how you're trying to impact the world, and will check you, give you feedback, help you along when you come up with these ideas. But when you come up with these new ideas, you're going to have some pushback. Number two, this is crucial. When people don't take you seriously, you're allowed to work quietly. I'm an introvert. I love working quietly. I'm literally talking to you in the screen. You don't see a bunch of people behind me. This is totally by design, right? This is not by accident. Beyond that, no matter how you work, you're talking about the inner process and the outer process. And they're both equally important. And those are both advantageous when people aren't taking you seriously. When people aren't taking you seriously, you actually have time to work on what Seth Godin calls the minimal viable audience. In other words, finding the people that are super fans or people who really are into your product. Whatever term you want to use, building that audience. If you're coming up with something or trying to do something that a million other people are doing, or like you came up with a business idea and it's going against Amazon, Google, and Facebook, Meta. If it's going against those three, it's going to be a little bit harder. People might take you seriously, but it's also going to be you trying to, I hate the term, but I can't think of a better one, steal the audience from these billion, trillion-dollar companies. Instead, you're working quietly, building up this minimal viable audience. It also allows you to create in peace, which is so important. We tend to undervalue that. When we come up with an idea, so often we want to have the big flashing lights, have the attention, have the press care about what we're doing. But sometimes that inclement climb, I think that's the term, that slow climb is the best way. And sometimes you're on the dark side of the mountain and then suddenly you appear at the top. That was the case with me and my two co-founders when we did Cutler. Again, it's an app that connects people for hugs. We had launched it in 2014, and the people that we were sharing the idea with thought it was absurd but interesting. Essentially, it's like Tinder or Grindr, which are called hookup apps, and those are for connecting with people sexually. This was not that. This was a version of that, but strictly platonic. So if you felt like you needed physical touch, if you had a rough day and you needed a hug and you didn't have anybody around, you can pull out your phone, go and put your location, find other people in the area who are up to cuddle or have a hug, and then say, yes, I'd like to connect. And then you connect in a public space and have a hug. That was it. We ended up having 100,000 users within the first week and 10,000 completed cuddles back when we launched, again, in September of 2014. The key was this. When we launched, we were one of, if not the laughingstock of Silicon Valley, and particularly beyond. The New York Post, a paper that I wrote for quite a bit at that time, actually was roasting the app. It's like, I'm one of your freelancers. How are you going to roast my app? But they did. So did a lot of daytime talk shows. We're on the late night talk shows. You can look up CUDDLR. Just Google it. You'll see a ton of stuff, mostly within the first week. But two things happened. Number one, obviously we got a ton of attention, which is beautiful, but our app was already out. But number two, no one was taking it seriously. They were like, this app is silly. No one wants to connect with other people for hugs. But me and my two co-founders, we trusted our vision. We're like, no, this is what the people want. So it was against the grain, it was original, and people were laughing at it. Within a year, we had 250,000 users, ended up getting acquired, and we all ended up getting paid. But it started to other people as a joke. The fact that people didn't take it seriously actually helped, because when Cuddler came out, again, we got a ton of attention, most of it negative, for lack of a better term. And then within about a month, maybe 6 weeks, suddenly you start to see the clones come in. Cuddle here, Cuddle Match. I can't remember the name of them. They were all pretty bad. No shot to y'all, they were clones. They were clones of the original thing that me and my partners created. They were clones. If people took us seriously in the beginning, if people were watching our every move while we were creating the app, then that competition would have been there from the very first day. In fact, they could have beaten us to the punch. Because again, we're three bootstrapping folks. We all have our day jobs. We were not professional entrepreneurs. It had only been my second startup, and my first one was super, super small. And for the other two folks, they had never really worked with startups on that level that we were doing. So it's not like we were professionals, but we had the early advantage. That's the secret when people don't take you seriously. You get the early advantage. And then you're able to run the race based on your original idea. But you have to be willing to take the heat and understand that people aren't going to always embrace your idea when you first come up with it. They're not always going to get your concept. That's why it's your concept. It's not somebody else's vision, it's yours. It's a gift to you. Your job, if you want to make an impact on the culture, is to carry it through to the finish line. All right, so 1,000 True Fans comes from a classic blog post from Kevin Kelly. I think it actually might have been before they invented the word blog. We're talking 15, 20 years ago, back when people were on LiveJournal and Facebook was just an idea, and going back all the way to MySpace and Friendster. What he talks about is how you just need 1,000 true fans. Because if you have 1,000 true fans, then you can actually financially get by, or at least have a decent living. Now, the definition of true fans are people who will go out of their way to get whatever you want, get whatever you're providing. If you have a new book, they're gonna go and get the book before they even read the description. If you have a new album out, they're gonna go and grab the album before, no matter what. These are people who are diehard fans, as we would say nowadays. These true fans are people who are willing to pay, whether it's time, attention, service, even money, to be closer to the idea or the service or the product that you're trying to get out there. You just need 1,000 of them. His theory is this: if you have 1,000 true fans and each one of them was willing to give you $100, then you're making $100,000 a year. Again, if you have 1,000 true fans, people that will buy any product or service as soon as it comes out that you're doing, you need to get $100 from each of them annually, and you can make $100,000 a year. You can make 6 figures. Now this scales, of course. So if you have 100 true fans, then if you have each of them spending like $1,000 on the work that you're doing, you can make 6 figures. And of course it goes down from there. If you only have 10 true fans, then you better have some good product, because each of them is going to have to spend $10,000. That's why we have certain specialized niches, like specialized lawnmowers, which were a big deal back when I lived in the Midwest. And they only need to sell a certain amount of product, but the product that they sell is so expensive or the people that they're working with are so loyal that they're willing to go ahead and pay for it, which is an awesome thing and a rare thing. But if the product that you're selling, such as a book, ends up being not $1,000, this is a $30 book, it is not $10,000, then you might need 900 or 1,000 fans to do so along those lines, maybe even more than that. This principle matters for a whole lot of reasons, and let's dive into it. The first thing is that it focuses you on serving, not on size. I've talked about this in several videos. I'll be sure to throw some links up there, including my own journey with my startup Cuddler, and we got to 250,000 users before we ended up selling it at a profit. Before we had those 250,000 users though, we just had 10 users, and it scaled from there. But because we focus on serving those users, we're able to get to that higher level. Now, so many people that I coach that are rushing to get the maximum amount of people in the door. But with Kevin Kelly's argument and with my own experience and many of the people that have coached experience, you don't need to have 1 million people off the top. About that in a video that I did recently about 2 Chainz, the rapper, if you're familiar with him, and Seth Godin, the thought leader, and their argument or discussion about minimal viable audience. Be sure and check that one out. If you focus on the minimal viable audience, then your focus shifts from trying to make as much money as possible or trying to have as much turnover to actually serving your audience. And there's a ridiculous long list of benefits from that. If you end up focusing more on your true fans, then you can actually build true fans. I was recently talking to a coaching client and talking about how you might be connecting with tens, dozens, maybe even hundreds or thousands of people, right? If you're fortunate enough to be exposed to that many people when you're at a conference, or if you do keynotes like I do, or you end up having a big social media audience, you're exposed to tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. Only a fraction of those people are going to be what Kevin Kelly would call your true fans. Your job is to find them. They're the people that are going to hang around afterwards when you have an event, and they're going to hang out and want to learn more about your product or service. They're the people that are going to be retweeting or liking or sharing your ideas on your favorite social media platform. If you're like me, which I highly recommend, you have some type of email newsletter or some way of actually, as I say, owning the land versus renting someone else's platform. If you have something like joindamon.me, which is an email newsletter list that I've had for a couple decades, but got serious about 5 years ago, where every Wednesday at 5:55 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, y'all get a newsletter from me. You get a message. That people that sign up for that at joindamon.me, they are more than likely going to become those diehards, those true fans, those hardcore folks. Those are folks you want to focus on. So in my case, I've done 4 TED Talks. I've done a lot of keynotes. My 26th book called Career Remix, Get the Gig You Want Based on the Skills You Got, is coming out in a few months. I've had bestsellers. All the people that I've been exposed to, small fraction of them, a little piece of them are the true diehard fans. You might be one of them. They're the people that pre-order my books before the ink's even dry. They're the people that join my boot camps that I have over at damonbrown.net. They are the folks that subscribe to this YouTube channel and subscribe to it from the beginning when I started and my lighting was all jacked up. Those are the diehard fans. Those are the true fans. If you build the true fans and you sort them out, then you're able to serve them. And as you serve them, they're going to bring in other true fans, what Seth Godin would call a tribe. But you can't get the whole tribe at once. You got to start with one. As 2 Chainz says in the other video that I made, you start with 1 fan a day, 1 song a day that you're creating, 1 product, 1 service, 1 person. If you do that, you build that true fan in there. And again, if you have 10 true fans that are willing to spend thousands of dollars on your work, you don't need 1 million people. So number 1, if you focus on the true fans, you shift to service rather than quantity. Kind of like quality versus quantity. The second part that occurs is, as I mentioned before, you end up focusing on the minimal viable audience. That's the smallest audience that's the most dedicated. The minimal viable audience is the smallest audience that's the most dedicated. It's almost like it's inversely proportional. Because you're trying to go for everybody, then you're going to be nothing to everybody. But if you're very specific, then that matters a lot. As I've said in other discussions, I'm focused on non-traditional entrepreneurs, side hustlers, solopreneurs, people part of the LGBTQ community, people who are BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, people who are underestimated and over-mentored, who don't have the usual resources, the people that are the target, specifically for my latest book, Build From Now, that's written for them. That is not for everybody, right? Because of that, I'm able to attract my true fans. Well, my friend Nilofer Merchant, she has a great book called The Power of Onlyness, which she would call signaling. If you're not willing to not have certain customers, if you're not willing to stand up and say, this is who I am, you're not going to attract those true fans. If you're not attracting the true fans, then you're not going to have true fans. You're going to have fair weather friends. You're going to have people that come through, maybe when you have a new book, maybe not. They're going to have people that will be into you because you're that hot new thing. You happen to have the bestseller. So all your energy should be going towards these true fans. And if you're not signaling, as Nilofer Merchant would say, your true self, your best self, then that first part of the process might be a little lonely because not everyone's going to get what you're trying to do. And as Seth Godin would say, your job is to maintain, whether it's pulling on different resources, having a very lean company, maybe even having a day job, which is why I'm a big proponent of side hustles rather than just diving in. Whatever you need to keep those resources going until you start to attract the right people. And once you start to attract the right people, then they become your true fans. As you build a rapport, as you build trust, as you build strength with these true fans, then they start to collect. And suddenly, you're making a living. Now, how many true fans you need depends on the type of work you're trying to do. For me, I need hundreds of true fans, as I found out, to make a decent living. Other people might need thousands. You just might need 10. But no matter what path or what you need for your particular lifestyle or your particular creativity path, it always starts with one. I remember those moments when I found my first true fans as an author, as a keynoter, as a TED speaker, as a coach even. I remember those moments. You'll know when it clicks. And you know that's the person that will support you on your journey because you're supporting them 100% on theirs. If you want more insight into finding true fans and finding your creative rhythm, particularly as things go up and down, and we all have our hills and our valleys and all the ups and downs with it, be sure and check out my free playlist over at youtube.com/BrownDamon, again, part of the free Bring Your Worth network. And it's a playlist called Creative Habits and Routines. It's about a dozen videos, all about 10 minutes long. They'll give you insight from Beyonce to Oprah to Simon Sinek to, I believe, Matt Cuban. I don't know who that is. Mark Cuban is in there. All kind of insights from all types of creative, successful entrepreneurs that will show you ways that you can keep your collective rhythm or your personal rhythm going while the collective figures out who you are and they figure out if they're true fans of yours or not. Until next time, remember to bring your worth and that you can always build from now. Take care.